So we're going to move on and introduce our keynote speaker, retired General Norm Cooling. He has a master's in national security and strategic studies from the U.S. Naval War College, a MMS from the Marine Corps University, and a BS in history from the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, Brigadier General Norm Cooling retired after 33 years of service, including 11 deployments and multiple combat tours as an infantry commander and operations officer. He has served as the Deputy Chief Operating Officer for both the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. European Command. General Cooling has commanded ground combat task forces in both Eastern Afghanistan and Iraq, and served as the Operations Officer for NATO's Regional Command in Afghanistan, and as the Operations Officer for the 1st Marine Division during the first phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, and that must have been quite an endeavor, actually. So let's welcome Norm. And Norm, please don't worry about the time. We've got all the time you need. I'm sure you've got a lot to tell us.
Well, I appreciate it, AJ. Thanks very much, and thanks to you, Jock, and to the whole team for quite honestly making us part-timers always feel like a part of the SMA family. I'm certainly honored to speak today about my life's passion, which is the United States Marine Corps, and I'll see if I can master technology and try to share my screen here with you. Okay, great. And I don't know who was responsible for the intro music, but fantastic job as normal. Nothing better than John Philip Sousa, the March King, the former director of the Marine Band. So well done. I think most people are familiar with this photograph, Joe Rosenthal's iconic flag raising photograph, second flag raising over Iwo Jima during World War II. But what you probably don't know is that as that flag went up, Secretary of the Navy, James V. Forrestal, was observing from the deck of one of the landing ships, and he turned to the landing force commander, which was Lieutenant General Holland M. Howland Mad Smith, who was the landing force commander again, and he said, "Holland, that flag means a Marine Corps for another 500 years." Just 2 years later, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Medal of Honor recipient Alexander Vandegrift, was testifying before the Congress in an attempt to prevent the Truman administration from collapsing the Marine Corps into the Army. Coined the "no bended knee" speech, he ended his testimony with these words, quote, "The Marine Corps then believes that it has earned the right to have its future decided by the legislative body which created it. Nothing more. Sentiment is not a valid consideration in determining questions of national security. We pride in ourselves in our past, but we do not rest our case on any presumed ground of gratitude owed us from the nation. The bended knee is not a tradition of our Corps. If the Marine as a fighting man has not made a case for himself after 170 years of service, he must go. But I think you will agree with me that he has earned the right to depart with dignity and honor, not by subjugation to the status of uselessness and servility planned for him by the War Department," unquote. And the reason I share that with you is because if you want to understand Marines as you're working with them, it's important to recognize the institutional paranoia that's a fundamental part of our culture. We have staved off multiple attempts over our 245-year history of being rolled into the Army or the Navy anytime budgets get tight. But we view that paranoia as a strength because it requires us to constantly adapt to environmental demands in order to bring unique value to the nation. And we're in a period of doing that right now. General Vandegrift's engagement with the Congress was effective, and the Marine Corps' roles and mission were set forth as depicted on the slide in the National Security Act of 1947, which also created the Department of Defense. As we review the Corps' history, you'll see how we've been aligned with our Title X responsibilities, how we've shifted from them on several occasions due to a change in national interests, and how we're now shifting back to these responsibilities, again, due to national interests. On average, we re-enter a period of major force design about every 20 years. The Marine Corps rewarded Congress's rescue during the Korean conflict by proving itself the only force capable of rapidly deploying to hold the Pusan perimeter, and shortly thereafter leading the landing at Incheon. This led the 82nd Congress to further expound upon our roles and mission, as you see depicted here on the slide. Specifically, they call for us to be the most ready when the nation is least ready. And in short, our primary purpose is to be at or to rapidly get to the point of crisis to contest our adversaries and raise the cost of the conflict for them. We win our nation's first battles and buy space and time for the president to decide what's next and to allow the joint force to fully mobilize. The Marine Corps was originally born on November 10th, 1775 in a bar, Tunkever, in Philadelphia. A date, November 10th, that all Marines hold pretty dear, and it's celebrated each year at post stations and every embassy around the world. It was on this date that the Second Continental Congress decreed that 2 battalions of Marines would be raised to serve as naval infantry to protect contracted privateer shipping from the British and from pirates. Following the Revolution, Marines continued to serve as shipboard and Navy Yard security detachments and as quote unquote soldiers of the sea, providing parties to go ashore, hence, to the shores of Tripoli in the Marines hymn that was played early on, which took place, of course, in the Barbary Wars. As the Marine Corps grew and our missions and capabilities evolved, we effectively became the State Department's Army at the turn of the 20th century and became the nation's experts in small war tactics during the banana wars in South America, the Philippines, and elsewhere. In World War I, the Marines shifted from small jungle wars to supporting the Army in large-scale conventional war and distinguished themselves by routing the Germans at Bellewood, France, thereby saving Paris. The Corps has similarly reinforced the Army in every major conflict since, earning notoriety in places like Iwo Jima, Chosin Reservoir, Hue City, Kuwait City, Fallujah, and Helmand Province, Afghanistan. So hopefully in all of that, you're noticing a pattern. Through it all, the Corps has become America's premier crisis response force as the only amphibious expeditionary air-ground logistics task force capable of responding to all manner of crises anywhere in the world by providing sustainable forced entry from the air, land, and sea. From entry-level training through top-level schools and at every level of training and education in between, Marines are imbued with the characteristic spirit of our culture, our ethos. We all strive to live up to the legacy of valor left to us by our forebears. So whether you spend 13 weeks at boot camp or your summers in college at Officers Candidate School, Marines have to earn the right to wear the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. The final graduation exercise at boot camps called the Crucible for a reason. You have to really want to be a Marine. And while Marines are known for their physical courage in battle, moral courage to do the right thing is just as important to every Marine. I think most are aware the Marine Corps is one of 2 services within the Department of the Navy, and it's composed of 3 major elements: the operating forces, the supporting establishment, which is our bases and stations primarily, and Marine Forces Reserve. Note that the 2 services, 1 department model is now no longer unique to the Department of the Navy, but of course it was the model for the creation of Space Force along with the Air Force in the Department of the Air Force. The Corps is the only force whose size is set by law. Title 10 of the U.S. Code directs that the Marine Corps will consist of 3 infantry divisions, 3 air wings, the necessary logistics support, and a similar organization within the reserves that consists of one infantry division and an air wing, so 4 wings and divisions altogether. At present, the Marine Corps numbers approximately 182,000 active duty personnel, of which 8.2% are always forward stationed and another 10.2% are forward deployed. And again, the supporting forces include the service headquarters, our recruiting and training establishments, and all the bases and stations. We'll talk about many of the component commands here in a few minutes, but the operating forces constitute the forward presence, crisis response, and firepower available to the combatant commanders. And when I use that term combatant commanders, for those who aren't familiar, it means U.S. European Command, U.S. Africa Command, Central Command, Indo-Pacific Command, et cetera, Southern Command. About 2/3 of all active Marines are assigned to those operating forces. And at any one point in time, they're kind of broken down in thirds. 1/3 of them are deployed. 1/3 of them have recently returned from deployment, and the other 1/3 are in their final qualification exercises to deploy. The reserve, which I'll only touch upon here briefly, it's headquartered in New Orleans. It's an integral part of the Marine Corps, and it's designed to augment and complement the active duty forces with over 187 training centers located in 48 states, as well as the territory of Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. The Marine Corps selected an active reserves total of about 36,000. But when you add the individual ready reserve to that, it moves closer to 95,000 total. I'm not going to say a lot about this slide other than there's where we are. Those are our permanent bases and stations. That big red box you see where Mexico would be is just an OCONUS box. Talks about where our installations are outside of the continental United States, and those are all in Japan, to include its territory in Okinawa, and Mujuk is in South Korea. Okay, so the Marine Corps has 6 core competencies. It's depicted on this slide. We're an expeditionary, globally responsive force in a constant state of high readiness. So that in a sentence, that really sums up what that slide says. And this would be, for structural and understanding purposes of the operating forces, the money slide, if you will. The Marine Corps is task organized as a middleweight force that lies between special operations forces and the heavier conventional forces within the U.S. Army. So we kind of like to give the analogy that special operations forces are a scalpel when you want to remove an organ. The chainmail fist of American diplomacy, the United States Army, when you really have a major conflict, war scale, and we're that ball peen hammer in the middle. We don't perform surgery very well, but we can take the limb off when it's necessary, and we can beat really, really, really hard and inflict a lot of pain until the bigger sledgehammer gets there. We're scalable and adaptive, and primarily provide the United States with the crisis response capability, but also are capable of operating across the range of military operations, from humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to full-scale conventional warfare. The MAGTAF, which is the Marine Air Ground Task Force, as you see on this slide, that's the most important acronym of bazillions of them in the Marine Corps. And as all of you know from working with the government and the Department of Defense in particular, acronyms are a thing. But this is our key acronym because it really describes how we organize, train, and fight. There are 4 echelons of MAGTAFs that are depicted on this slide, and it shows each of the levels with the engagement intensity scale associated with those. The Marine Expeditionary Force, or MEF, the Marine Expeditionary Brigade, or MEB, the Marine Expeditionary Unit, or MU, or the smallest is the Special Purpose MAGTAF. Headquarters for all of those except the last one are standing. Regardless of the size, all MAGTFs share four common organizational elements that you see in the upper left-hand corner. They all have a command element. They all have a ground, an aviation, and a logistics combat element. Fundamental to the MAGTF is the ability to seamlessly scale from one size to another and to tailor each MAGTF for a particular mission or phase of an operation. The four different kinds also provide the combatant commanders with a versatile expeditionary force that's capable of responding to a broad range of contingencies, crises, and conflicts, regardless of what the circumstances may be. And this graphic's from last week's Headquarters Marine Corps current operations brief. So just gives you an idea of where Marines are located at a single snapshot in time. Today, it's the Marine Corps is organized with 3 MEFs, each with a division, an air wing, and a logistics group, and then another of each of those in reserve. First MEF is located in California and Arizona. Second MEF is located at bases in North and South Carolina. And 3 MEF is our forward-based MEF in Okinawa, mainland Japan, and Hawaii. The MEFs are our principal warfighting organization during larger crises or contingencies. Normally numbers around 45,000 Marines, scalable up to 90,000. They're commanded by Marine lieutenant generals, and they're capable of amphibious forcible entry operations and sustained ops ashore in any kind of geographic environment. With appropriate augmentation, they can also, the command element of the MEF is also the core for a joint task force with the other services. And the MEF is also the generator of all other echelons of the MEF. So each of those other scalable units come out of the body of each of the MEFs. Note one thing on this slide, that 60 country deployments piece down in the lower left-hand corner, that doesn't include, of course, the embassy security guards, which I'll address a little bit later. The Marine Expeditionary Brigade, the MEB, is created from forces as mentioned within the MEF. Normally, the commander of the MEB is the deputy commander of the MEF. He's a 2-star. They've got a regimental size landing team, a composite Marine Air Group, which means both fixed wing aircraft, the F-35s, AV-8s, or F-18s, and rotary / tilt rotor aircraft, the Ospreys, the Cobras, and the Iroquois. The MEB size to be strategic, agile, and transportable anywhere in the world in order to respond to large-scale crises. The MEB's powerful enough to serve as the initial entry force for a MEF or a multi-service or multinational force. It can be deployed in several different ways. You see the upper right shows an amphibious task force, which has its equipment on board. The ship in the lower right is a part of our maritime preposition squadrons, which has containerized equipment to include rolling stock, armored vehicles, artillery, et cetera, which are complemented by fly-in echelons of the MEB's Marines. One other note, it's kind of also important to recognize that a Marine brigade is not like an Army brigade. The MEB has about 17,000 Marines, and it has fixed-wing aircraft, while an Army brigade combat team numbers, depending on which one, between 3,500 and 4,200 soldiers, and doesn't have organic aircraft or strategic lift. I don't say that to pick a fight with our sister service. They are certainly the chainmail fist of American diplomacy, but it is important to note when you're working with the two services that particular term has an entirely different meaning. And then probably the most employed unit, arguably in the operating forces for all the services, is the Marine Expeditionary Unit, or the MEU. It's the smallest of the standing MAGTFs, commanded by a colonel. It has a composite squadron that's based around a battalion landing team, along with its logistics battalion. We nearly always have 2 to 3 MEUs deployed somewhere in the world ready to respond to crises. And probably the most visible recently was the evacuation of Kabul a few weeks ago, which included one of the Marine Expeditionary Units. They're trained to execute up to 24 special maritime operations missions. And because of that training, they're prepared to initiate a wide variety of missions within 6 hours of notification. They train in rapid crisis planning to respond in 6 hours or less. And there are, again, 2 to 3 of them always deployed. And then finally, the last MAGTF type is the special purpose. Normally, these are created for something specifically tailored for mission operation or regionally focused exercise. Special purpose MAGTF Katrina, for example, was formed to assist in the Gulf Coast states' recovery from the hurricane in September of 2005. There are 2 standing ones right now. The last ones you see there in Africa and Central Command. The Africa Command one, for example, was the result of them not having a crisis response force located regionally there that could effectively deal with the Benghazi crisis. So since then, we have formed a special purpose MAGTF to meet that requirement. CBRF, the Chemical Biological Incident Response Force. They identify and isolate chemical or biological incidents while leading the early decontamination of personnel and equipment at home or abroad. As an example, CBRF deployed to Japan in March of 2011 after the 8.9 magnitude earthquake there and the subsequent tsunami crippled the Japanese nuclear reactor in northeastern Japan. So CBRF is often deployed in support of presidential inaugurations, State of the Union addresses, the Olympic Games, regardless of where they are and who's hosting them, all of those things. Security Force Regiment, that's another tailored capability. It provides fleet anti-terror and counterterrorism security teams in support of both the naval commanders and combatant commanders. And it provides security for strategic weapons, i.e. our nukes, and other vital national interests around the world. That's about 2,200 Marines trained for that capability. And then kind of the last type of Marine operations I'll mention are the Marine Corps Embassy Security Guards. McKessage, as that command is known, supports 148 embassies and consulates in 133 countries around the globe. The security debts typically range only from 6 to 15 Marines, depending on the scope of the post. They're responsible for each post's classified materials, manning post 1. So the first thing you see when you walk into any embassy around the world is a U.S. Marine behind a plate glass window. They're the inner core of the regional security officers' defense of each embassy, and they perform various ceremonial duties and assist with the ambassador's personal security. And if you ever have a chance in a dialogue with an ambassador, I would encourage you to ask what they think of their Marine security guards. Just ending up on this last couple slides, it's really, that's all where we've been. It's where what we provide currently. Now where are we going? And I think that many of you are somewhat familiar with that. Current commandants gained a lot of notoriety in accepting a lot of institutional risk associated with the latest force redesign effort. But it all comes from this, the National Defense Strategy, which kind of reorients us away from global terrorist activities. Not that we're divesting those capabilities entirely, but they can't be our focus anymore as China and Russia and others have risen in prominence and capability to be able to compete more effectively with us around the world. So we're engaged in a major force redesign effort to accept increasing risk in areas like counterinsurgency and to prioritize defending U.S. and allied interests in the region, the Indo-Pacific region in particular. And that calls for a disaggregated maritime force that's capable of operating and surviving inside China's threat ring. We want to make the cost of doing something like invading Taiwan high from the outset for the Chinese. So the Marines in Okinawa, the Marines stationed in Japan, the ones on Guam, which is a growing presence, all of that will be disaggregated in island exercises and campaigns continuously to compete with Chinese aggression in that region. This is our Commandant General Berger's single message slide. The thesis here is, if you will, lies in those current and future force boxes. So everything in his commandancy is dedicated to optimizing the Marine Corps to confront the threat of China. And it's a big bet. For example, one of the projects SMA has been working as the Littoral Combat Ship, or LCS. To attain the LCS in quantity, the Marine Corps has voluntarily reduced our force structure, eliminated 4 tank battalions, and backed away from our traditional quantity demand for larger scale amphibious ships that was rooted in the Korean War plan. Traditional units like battalions are being retooled into littoral combat teams, optimized for distributed operations on multiple islands to enable command and control, intelligence, and networked fires, including the ability to sink Chinese naval combatants at sea. To this end, programs like amphibious connectors, expeditionary anti-ship missiles, 5th generation aircraft that can penetrate Chinese radar and detection systems, secure cloud-based digital communications, unmanned air and ground systems, computer design and 3D printing in support of logistics capabilities, and elaborate decoy and deception capabilities. Those are at the top of the Marine Corps' R&D and procurement agendas. But please note during this brief that this is the only time I've mentioned equipment. I didn't mention, really go into any detail on things like the F-35 and the MV-22 or the CH-53 or any specific hardware system. And that's because the thing I really want everyone to take away from this is that our ethos is rooted in manning or equipping the man or the woman. It's not in manning the equipment, because at the end of the day, it's the ingenuity and the will of the individual Marine that defines your Marine Corps, and it is your Marine Corps, not the equipment programs. And I appreciate everybody's time. I hope that was helpful.
That was. Thank you so much, Norm. And I appreciate how you ended it, because the other services are, I think, perhaps seem to be more focused on manning the equipment or the platform, and it comes across clear that the core ethos of the Marine Corps is actually around the individual and equipping the individual.
We do. Thanks, AJ. And I won't do, an old retired general will not do the justice to the enthusiasm of speaking to a young first-term enlisted Marine or a young officer for that matter. I know most of you, I hope, have had the opportunity to engage with one or more of them in your community or at some point. If you haven't, please seek one out. They will do a much better job of conveying than I ever would how much they love this country and love its citizens.
Indeed, indeed. We have a number of former Marines amongst our associates, actually a good number. And I have to relay a very, very short, quick story. I was involved about 10 years ago in a prototype on the move over the horizon. It was a really highly modified Jeep for the Marine Corps, for the 3rd MEF, actually. And I remember going to Hawaii and meeting, it was a room full of Marines there. And, we were the contractor, right, building out this platform. I had not seen a sharper group of soldiers ever since that room. Man, the master sergeant that was there, that was running the show, was incredible.
Absolutely.
And that's the key, John. You definitely isolated upon it, and that's true really for all of our armed forces to an extent. We take pride in always thinking we're the best at that, but in all seriousness, when you look at mentoring international forces around the globe, no one has better non-commissioned officers, that lower middle manager, if you will, in a civilian construct than we do. That they are able to think on their feet, they're confident in themselves, and they make the right decisions under unbelievable pressure.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, I've had the opportunity, the pleasure actually of working with a number of different Marines. Major Decker, Major Welker, Colonel Stewart, Major Vallant, and many others. And I'll tell you what, from whether they're officers or enlisted, the commitment, enthusiasm of those individuals is inspiring.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, great.
I just want to add one story. We used to Norm's point about the NCOs. We used to have our senior enlisted folks, when the Russians came on board to our ships years ago, and of course we were getting along with the Russians, we'd bring them on board our ships, we'd show them around, and the person or persons who would show them around were our senior enlisted folks, our chiefs and our first class and second class petty officers, and they would inevitably pull me aside and go, "David, this is a joke, right? He's a plant, he's an officer." And I said, "No, he's really." So they were every time. So they were always so impressed. To Norm's point, I think that was great. Thanks, Norm. Great presentation.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much, Norm. Thank you.
And I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge General Bukowski.
Oh yes, Ron Brzezowski, who introduced us to Norm. That's right.
Absolutely.
Yep. Another Marine general who was a client of ours for a number of years. That's right.
A great guy.
Yep.
You guys are going to start getting a bad reputation. You're hanging out with guys like us in Monero and the Navy. I mean, Lord,
Yes. I did not know. Dave Monero, were you a Marine? I did not realize that.
He's our resident Navy brother.
Ah, okay.
Look at this, AJ. Look, this is too good. This right? Is that right, Norm?
All right. Hey, thank you so much, guys. We'll look forward to future talks about our customers. And thank you, Norm. That was an excellent presentation.
Yep.